Good evening, Internet. Welcome back to another night of Talks about horror movies for probably far too long. I'm That's all just over my shoulder. Tonight we're going to be talking about Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. This is the newest movie from Jane Schoenbrun. I really like this film a lot. If you've heard about it before, I'd highly recommend going and seeing it. If you like Jane Schoenbrun's films, highly recommend it. If you are someone who has not heard about it before, stick around because I'm going to be talking about it. Usually in these talks, I'll go through kind of the setup of the film. It's really hard to do that with this film because it's a Russian nesting doll of like meta commentary. It's hard to describe this film as like a genre. It's kind of a surreal meta horror. It's kind of a functional slasher. There is like a 20 to 30 minute slasher within the wraparound story of this movie. It's kind of a dark comedy. It's kind of a meditation on sex and death in horror and the connection between the two. And it's kind of a postmodern lesbian romance. So just a little bit there for everybody. The concept of the film is that there is a slasher series called Camp Miasma. And it is a little bit tainted by the fact that the origin story for the killer in the first movie is transphobic. So, modern day director Chris Chris is given the direction of the reboot or the sequel or the requel, and she wants to do something new with it. She wants to do something different with it. At 8 years old, she saw a VHS copy of Camp Miasma, and that was her sexual awakening. And she wants to take the Camp Miasma franchise. She wants to capture the magic of the moment that she realized that she was queer. And Billy, the final girl from the first movie, she sends a letter to Billy's actress, or sorry, she sends a letter to Billy, asking her to come see if they can like rekindle that magic, if they can somehow figure out how to capture the look in Billy's eye at that moment on the screen. And that is the setup for the film. Now, I can give you more information than that, but it's all wrapped up together. And anything that I say that kind of talks about like the Camp Miasma film itself, that's going to be reflected in the third act. Anything I tell you about like the outer layer, that's going to be reflected in the third act. So basically anything that I can tell you about the first or second act of the film is going to be spoilers. So I'm going to give you guys a warning. I'm going to get into spoilers. I really like this movie. I think that if you are a fan of Schoenbrun's other films, if you are a fan of meta horror, either the Joss Whedon like Cabin in the Woods meta horror, or the David Lynch Inland Empire meta horror, or even the Control Remedyverse Sam Lake meta horror, I think it's worth your time. If you are someone who is a fan of slashers and maybe you're not familiar with meta horror, but maybe you really like the Friday the 13th, the Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween and Sleepaway Camp, this might be a good fit for you as well. But yeah, I'm going to give you guys my spoiler warning. I'm going to take a drink. As soon as I finish my drink, I'm going to get into spoilers. So if you want to stop out here, it's entirely fine. All right, guys. So if you are still around, I am assuming that you are okay with spoilers. I had a blast with this movie. This is such a fun movie. Um, and it's hard to describe with words. It's one of those movies that you should experience. Like I would highly recommend going out and experiencing it, even if you like get the spoilers, even if you are like gonna stick around to the end and hear my talk about it. Highly recommend going and seeing it for yourself because it's going to be much better seeing it and experiencing it than it is just watching video essays about it. But yeah, so in the inner like core, the inner Russian nesting doll of this movie, there is the movie Camp Miasma, and this is a functional slasher. Uh, Zach Cherry from Severance is kind of the ringleader of this group of teenagers. They go out to Camp Miasma the day before camp is about to start, before the kids get there, so that they can drink and smoke and have sex and all of the teenage revelry stuff. Um, Zach Cherry tells the story of uh, Little Death. I'll get back to Little Death here in a few. Little Death was a camper who was gender fluid, and this was the film in universe was filmed back in the 80s. It is not politically correct, and that's part of the reason why it's getting a reboot. But Little Death was a gender fluid person at the camp. They had a bunk in the boys' bunk, they had a bunk in the girls' bunk, and they were like just existing as a gender fluid person. And one day the other campers started to tease them, which happens. According to the story that Zach Cherry tells, when they started to tease Little Death, Little Death went berserk and started to attack them, and they were forced to drown them in the lake. On the screen, which we can see with our eyeballs, that's not happening at all. They start teasing Little Death, and Little Death looks really confused, and then they drown them. Little Death is played in this movie by Jack Haven, who was Maddie on I Saw the TV Glow. They don't have any speaking parts in this film. It's all like gesturing, head tilts, but they have a lot of personality, which is cool. There's a scene, there's a long shot in the middle of the movie. You guys, if you've been around for a little while, you know I'm a sucker for a good long shot. So it's a point of view shot that flips into a long shot of Little Death just massacring these teenagers at Camp Miasma. And there's a part where Little Death it gets into the mess hall and is slaughtering the teens, and then gets tired and sits down and catches their breath. Such a fun little part. So while all of this is happening, the character Billy. Billy was the actress who played the main character in Camp Miasma, the final girl. She goes upstairs with one of the main guys. He is wearing like an army jacket. That's his archetype. Is he's like the guy who came back from Vietnam, or guy who wears his older brother's like military jacket, something like that. And he is supposed to be the heartthrob, the cute one. But she's really not interested in the act of having sex with him. And it's really obvious if you just look at her. But he's like, everybody's got to lose their virginity at some point. Like, think about like going to the doctor's office and getting a shot, except this time I'll make you feel good. She's like, I guess, right? I guess. So he takes her up to the bed, and she's looking at the bedpost, and there are notches from the girls that he's taken there recently. And she's like, what are these notches? And he's like, don't worry about that. Just focus on me. I'm going to make you feel really good. So he makes a move on her, and he climbs on top of her, and she is like, again, not really into it, but it's happening. So she's kind of like looking up. And that's when Little Death, the killer, comes in and is like towering over them with a spear. Little Death's character design in this movie is that Little Death wears a vent cover. Like if you have an industrial vent at your place of work, the cover for that, where the air blows out, that's their face. And then they are wearing like a plastic painter's outfit, which gets covered in blood as they go through. And then they've got a spear that's just made of a hunk of like sheet metal. And it's got two little like blade catchers on the ends, which I guess they look cool. I don't know how functional they are. Little Death, if you're not aware, is the French phrase for an orgasm. I never learned French, but it's le petit, le petit morta, something like that. So the killer in this movie is literally named Orgasm. So later, when the director of the reboot, Chris, is talking with the actress who played the final girl in the movie, Billy, Billy is... the lines between her and her character are kind of blurred at this point. It seems like she was 24 playing a 17-year-old, but she says like I made the decision to go have sex with him. So I'm not sure how much of that is her and how much is her character. The character makes the decision to go have sex with them. They go have sex, and then as they're having sex, she can see herself through the point of view shot of Little Death. She dissociates and she like catches on to the same wavelength as the killer. And the killer comes and is towering over her with the spear. And when the killer brings the spear down through the boy's back and murders him, that's when Billy has the best orgasm of her life. Oh my god. So I bet you guys didn't think that we were going to be talking about this when you clicked on the video tonight. Um, so coming out of the film within the film, Billy is played by Gillian Anderson, who was Scully on the X-Files. I've heard from many people that Scully on the X-Files was their queer awakening. So I'm sure that Gillian Anderson being Billy is probably like autobiographical on Jane Schoenbrun's part, or maybe they have friends who had that same awakening and they're just reporting it. But funny that that's a connection. I talked about Zach Cherry. Kevin McDonald from Kids in the Hall is in this film. The people in the theater with me recognized him. I recognized him. I did the Leo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when he's like, I know that guy. Um, Kevin McDonald plays the bellhop at the local hotel. Chris stops in for the night and she finds a copy of Camp Miasma 6 at the gas station. And she stops in for the night and she's like, hey, would you happen to have a DVD player? I want to watch this in my room. And he's like, oh, I was in that. I was in Camp Miasma 6. They needed some local flavor. It was filmed right up the road here. And they just tapped me to be in it. And you see him in the film at the ending film, the ending of the film. He is playing the inept deputy. Later, when we see the Camp Miasma 1, we get to see him again as the inept deputy who gets murdered by Little Death. So many fun things in this movie. Patrick Fischler, who was the dreamer in Mulholland Drive, plays the Harbinger archetype. If you're familiar with like Inland Empire, the old woman who comes and is like, I want to tell you a scary story. In Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's the hitchhiker. In Cabin in the Woods, there's like a guy at the gas station who does it. The Harbinger is the one who is like, you guys are trespassing, you're gonna die, and then the kids ignore them and go to their doom anyway. So Patrick Fischler plays the Harbinger in this one. He works at the gas station. It's like, where do you kids think you're going? And she's like, oh, we're just going up to camp. We're setting up before the kids get there. He's like, if you're going up to camp, going to your doom. So young and nubile. And then later, Chris, the director, she enters into the fiction of the Camp Miasma series, and she sees him, and he's all like washed out. He hasn't been color graded yet, and he mentions about how he doesn't like that the film is unfinished, which is funny. And he plays the Harbinger again. He's like, where do you think you're going? If you're going that way, there's nothing but death there for you. You're so young. And she's like, and nubile. And he's like, and nubile. So good. Such good like humor in this horror movie. So Chris and Billy, Chris drives out to meet Billy at the campsite where Camp Miasma was filmed. Billy just lives here in a small cabin with 2 rooms. And at first she is like fucking with Chris. So when Chris first gets there, there's a cinema room where they project project movies for the kids who are at camp, presumably. And Billy is like rolling that scene of her in the upstairs at Camp Miasma, having sex and about to be murdered. And the camera focuses on the eye shot, the reflection of little death in young Billy's eye, and it's a great shot. Like just the cinematography, very good. And it pauses there. And in her letter to Billy, Chris had mentioned that that scene is what like really just made Camp Miasma for her when she was a kid. And she wants to rekindle that magic. She wants to figure out how to capture that feeling for another generation. And so when she first meets Billy, Billy is like, sorry to give you a scare, but I thought it was only fair. You've seen my work. Thought I should get to see you scared. And then later they go to dinner at the cabin, and Billy, this is a whole other like offshoot. Billy has gone into town and got 2 buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, for dinner, which normally in films like this you wouldn't comment on it, right? It just looks like product placement, but there's an entire conversation about these buckets of KFC fried chicken, and she is like essentially like, speaking of desire, do you like dipping sauce? And then it like cuts to them eating chicken like sensually, like vaguely pornographically. So many like funny like directing decisions, so many funny cinematography decisions. Um, and the meal is laid out on a long table as if it were like a feast. So there's like a platter of chicken in the middle. There's like onion rings, and there's other sides just like off to the side. It's so funny. It's such a funny visual. Um, so they are like talking to each other. They're getting to know each other, and they start having this lesbian relationship where Billy is kind of like trying to get Chris to tell her, like, what do you like? How do you like to be touched? How can I pleasure you? And Billy is, or not Billy, Chris is like, I don't really know, like dealer's choice. Just do what you want to do. And as she's lying there, she's looking up and she kind of sees herself in the reflection of Little Death's air vent grate, but it's distorted. It's not full. It's like she can't get to the full experience. And then she stops Billy. She's like, I'm sorry. I hate myself. I'm so bad at sex. And Billy is like, nobody's bad at sex. Like, calm down. I'll put a blanket on you. We can make some s'mores. We can relax. One of the recurring like visual gags throughout the movie is candy. So when she first stops in at the gas station, she buys like way more candy than anybody could realistically eat. And then she watches the Camp Miasma DVD in her hotel room, and she eats like all of the candy. And when she gets to Billy's cabin, she opens up like a champagne ice tray, whatever those old ice trays are, and it's filled with gummy bears. And there's a shot where they're sitting in, or they're lying in the floor of the cabin, and there's just candy like all around them in a circle, like rose petals, like it's supposed to be romantic. It's so surreal. And they confess to each other that Billy tells her story about her first orgasm and her best orgasm while she was like dissociating from this event within the movie and seeing Little Death coming up behind her, ready to murder her. And this connection between sex and death is what was able to like break through the box and get her out of her the box that she was in. So Chris confesses that the way that she gets off during sex is that she dissociates, she pictures herself as characters in the movies, sometimes from movie 2, sometimes from movie 6, but sometimes she thinks of herself as Billy's character in the first Camp Miasma. There's a connection there, and she thinks of herself like starting as the director, but then as she gets into the role play of it, as she gets into the action of it, she becomes the final girl, the sexy final girl, and she sees herself like in tight clothing and just her panties and a t-shirt, and her breasts are like shaking as she's running, and you can see her nipples through the thin fabric of the shirt, and she's like, I know it's like objectifying, it's misogynist, it's like it's not feminist, but it just feels so good. And while she's doing this, Billy is like pleasuring her. She's like, yeah, just experiment with it, like think about it, like get into it. And she's like, do you want to make a movie with me? And Chris is like, yeah, I think I am. And that kind of like sets up the third act, which is Chris entering into the fiction of Camp Miasma and becoming a part of it. And there's an explanation that both Billy and Chris give at two separate points, which is that Camp Miasma is real. There is a hole at the bottom of Camp Miasma where the movies come from, and where Little Death lives. And when Little Death gets bored, whenever they get hungry, they come out of this hole in the bottom of the lake in order to feed. And they come out, they massacre a bunch of people, and then they go back. So this is given as an explanation from Gillian Anderson as Billy. And then she kind of laughs it off. She's like, I had you going. You thought that I was a psycho killer. And Chris is like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but yeah. And then later, Chris is on a video call with the producers who are trying to make the series more commercially viable. And the producers are like, okay, tell us what you have for the origin story. How do we fix this transphobic origin story so that it is more commercially viable, so that it is like appropriate for the post woke age? How do we turn this franchise into a moneymaker again? And she's on the video call with them. She says, yeah, so I've been working over it for the past few days, and there's this hole at the bottom of the lake, and Little Death lives inside the hole, and that's where the movies come from. Her producers are like, fuck is she talking about? So Chris gets pulled into the fiction of the film. The tagline for the first film, which is repeated a few times throughout the movie, is "It's only a movie. If it gets too real, you can always turn it off." But Chris doesn't feel that way when she's actually in the movie. So Billy takes her down to the edge of Camp Miasma. There is a pulse where the setting suddenly switches from winter to spring, and Little Death has this iconographic shot where they stick their spear through the surface of the lake before walking out onto the beach. And as Chris and Billy are standing there, Little Death does the iconography. They come up on the beach, and Billy is like, I'm going to push you down. I would recommend like running as fast as you can. You need to get a head start. And Chris is like, okay. And then Billy pushes her down the side of the hill. Chris goes tumbling down to the beach. And then Little Death comes up and spears the sand right next to her. And she's like, I'm a big fan, but I'm just gonna and starts running into the forest. And then she realizes that she's still in her winter clothes, and she takes off her like thick winter jacket, and she like takes off her sweater, and she's not wearing a bra. She's wearing that tight like t-shirt that you can see her nipples through. She takes off her pants, so she's just running through the woods in her panties. So funny, just incredibly funny. And then for like no reason. It's set up earlier in the film that she is in a V-shaped polyamorous relationship where she's got a partner who has another partner. Um, so her partner and her partner's partner show up at Camp Miasma to save her. And she like runs up and hugs her partner, and then she's like, I really have to get out of here," and she runs off into the forest. And Little Death comes up and kills both of them. And then like the her agent who she's talking throughout the movie, who's like, "Yeah, we need to meet with the producers. They're not going to go for this. They're going to go for this. What they really need you to do is do the origin story. Just focus on the origin story." Her agent shows up and is like, "Hey, I heard that meeting that you had with the producers went really badly. Let's like sit down and see if we can iron out the origin story." And while she's talking, she gets murdered. And then the producers who she was on the video call with, they show up and they're like, "Hey, so we're really not feeling it about the origin story that you came up with. We get it. It's very meta. It's like New Nightmare from horror master Wes Craven. We get it. We're really looking for something like a little bit commercially viable." And as they're giving their spiel, she runs off, and Little Death comes up and murders all of them. It's so funny. It's just such a great like escalation of what's been set up before. And then Chris runs up the hill to Billy's cabin. While this is happening, Billy is like sprinkling rose petals around the bed, lighting candles, dancing to music sensually. And she gets Chris gets up to Billy's room, lays down in bed with Billy. Billy and Chris like lie down together, and Billy is like, "Just focus on me, just focus on the feeling, focus on the emotion. Like, we're going to get through this together." And Chris is like, "This doesn't feel like a movie. This feels real." Billy's like, "Shh, just let's go along with it." And Chris is like, "Promise me you won't leave me." And Billy's like, "I promise you I won't leave you." They're, they're there together in bed. It's very quiet. And then it happens. They're both like covered in blood. Like Chris is coughing up blood, and Billy is like projectile vomiting blood all over Chris. The least sexy like orgasm scene I've probably ever seen. Um, and then Little Death goes back to the hole in the bottom of the lake, and Chris and Billy wake up, and they are just like in this post orgasm haze. um, there's so much to talk about in this movie, and I'm not even sure how to make an inroad with it. But this meditation on the like slasher films as like a form of sensual sexual release. Um, yeah, it's so like it's so there, right? It's just present. Um, they get up together, they go into the gas station together, and they're buying candy from the gas station, and they're just covered in blood and gore. And I think that they still have holes in them. I don't remember if I checked, but I think that they still have holes in them from where they were murdered by Little Death. And Little Death goes back to the hole in the bottom of the lake, and like the tape pops out, and it's titled "Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma." So many like good subtle touches, so much artistry in this like horror comedy film. Um, so they leave the gas station, and Chris kind of wanders off towards the camera, and there's a shot where it's like foreground Chris and background Billy. And Billy is like, "What's wrong? Is something the matter?" And Chris recites the ending speech from Camp Miasma 6, um, about how Little Death is still there at the bottom of the lake. And one day they'll come back, and they'll be hungry, and they'll have to kill and sate their hunger once again. And the whole time she's got this big smile on her face. It's so good. Um, So yeah, I enjoyed this movie a lot. There's just so much to say about like the directing, and I don't think I even talked about like the visual touches. So like when the reality of Camp Miasma film starts to invade the reality of the like outer Russian nesting doll, there are like visual cues. So there's like film grain that pops up. If you ever saw Fight Club, where he talks about the cigarette burns in the corner of the screen, where they put those there so the projection worker knows to switch the reel over. Those are in the film. Like they have been manually put there, first in Camp Miasma and then in the outer reality of Camp Miasma. So many like visual touches, so much like depth to the thoughts about the meditation on like the connection between sex and death. The kill shot as orgasm, the awakening of sexuality through horror. So many like good thoughts and so much like clever writing. Um, yeah, I can't recommend enough. If you like Jane Schoenbrun's other films, and if this at all sounds interesting to you, please go see this movie, because that's going to give Jane Schoenbrun the chance to make more films that are going to be experimental and fun. And yeah, I can't recommend enough. If you are just a horror nerd like me, if you are non-binary like me, if you are interested in meta horror, if you are interested in like discussions of horror and sexuality and all of that stuff, this is a film for you. I hope that I have sold you on this film, is what I'll say. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all for joining me for another night of Talks about horror movies for probably far too long. I love you. I'll see you in the next video. Good night.